The maitre d' didn't even look up when he said no. The word landed heavier than it should have, as if it carried the weight of every empty room, every silent dinner, every unread message that had defined Alaric Vance's life for the past decade. Around him, laughter shimmered through crystal glasses, chandeliers glowed like constellations, and the city pulsed with anticipation for midnight. Yet somehow, the man who owned half the skyline stood alone on the sidewalk, invisible. For a moment, he didn't move. The cold air of the late afternoon bit through his tailored coat, but it wasn't the cold that hollowed him out. It was the realization that despite everything he had built, everything he had conquered, he couldn't even buy a seat at a table on New Year's Eve. Before we go further, take a second, if you believe kindness and second chances still matter. In this world, tap that like button, share this story, and subscribe to Home with Dad. And tell me in the comments, have you ever felt invisible in a room full of people? Alaric Vance wasn't just wealthy. He was the kind of wealthy that turned heads in boardrooms and silenced conversations when he entered. His name was printed in bold across financial magazines, his decisions moved markets, and his company's towers of glass and steel stretched across continents. But none of that mattered as he stood outside the most exclusive restaurant in the city, turned away like a stranger who couldn't afford a reservation. Inside, every table was full. Couples leaned close, families toasted early, friends clinked glasses with joy that spilled into the street. The maitre d' had apologized, but not sincerely. There had been a flicker of recognition in his eyes, followed by something colder: indifference. Power didn't matter here tonight. Not without a reservation. Alaric could have called the owner. He could have made one phone call and cleared a table within minutes. But something stopped him. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was exhaustion, or maybe it was the quiet, uncomfortable truth that he was tired of forcing doors open. So instead, he stepped aside, letting the next hopeful couple approach the entrance. They were turned away too. But unlike him, they laughed it off, wrapping their arms around each other as they walked back into the night. He envied them more than he would ever admit. The sun was still hanging low in the sky, casting a golden haze over the city. It was supposed to be a day of celebration, of reflection, of hope. For Alaric, it felt like a mirror held too close, reflecting everything he had avoided thinking about. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He didn't check it. He already knew what it would be: messages from colleagues, automated holiday greetings, perhaps an invitation to a last-minute corporate event where he would stand in a crowded room, smiling politely while feeling nothing. He started walking. There was no destination in mind, just movement, just distance from the restaurant, from the rejection, from the quiet echo of his own life. The streets grew less polished as he wandered farther from the center. The boutiques gave way to smaller shops, the polished sidewalks to uneven pavement. The city here felt more real, less curated. People carried grocery bags instead of designer purses. Children ran past him, their laughter loud and unfiltered, and then he saw it. A small diner sat on the corner, its neon sign flickering slightly even in the daylight. It wasn't impressive, it wasn't exclusive. It was the kind of place people went when they didn't have anywhere else to be. For reasons he couldn't explain, he stopped. Through the window, he could see a few tables occupied. A waitress moved between them with easy familiarity, and behind the counter, a man flipped something on a grill. It was simple, ordinary, alive in a way the high-end restaurant had not been. He stepped inside. The bell above the door chimed softly, and for a moment everything paused. Not dramatically, not in the way movies depict, but subtly. A glance here, a flicker of curiosity there. He stood out, even without trying. The smell hit him first. Coffee, butter, something sweet baking in the oven. It wrapped around him like a memory he didn't realize he still carried. "Sit anywhere," the waitress said, her voice warm but distracted. He chose a table near the window. For the first time that day, he exhaled. Minutes passed. He didn't look at his phone. He didn't check the time. He simply sat, watching the world move outside. And then, just as he began to settle into the quiet, the door opened again. A man walked in, holding the hand of a little girl. They weren't dressed for the occasion. The man's coat was worn, his shoes scuffed. The girl's hair was tied back in a slightly uneven ponytail, her jacket just a little too big for her small frame. But there was something about them, something unmistakably bright. They paused near the entrance, the man scanning the room with a hint of hesitation. The diner was almost full. Alaric watched as the man leaned down slightly, whispering something to the girl. She nodded, though her eyes lingered on the tables, hopeful. And then it happened. The man straightened, lifted his hand, and gave a small wave toward Alaric's table. Not the kind of wave meant for a friend. Not even one meant for recognition. It was tentative, uncertain, almost apologetic. Alaric frowned slightly, unsure if it was meant for him. But then the man gestured gently toward the empty seat across from Alaric, his expression carrying a simple, silent question, "Would you mind?" For a moment, time seemed to stretch. This was not how Alaric's life worked. People didn't approach him like this. They didn't ask to share his space without knowing who he was, without calculating what they might gain. And yet here was a stranger, asking for nothing more than a place to sit. Alaric hesitated. In that hesitation lived years of habit, of distance, of carefully constructed walls. But then he looked at the little girl. Her eyes were hopeful, but not entitled. Curious, but not demanding. There was a quiet resilience there, the kind that didn't come from ease. Something shifted. He nodded. The man's face lit up with relief, and he guided the girl to the seat across from Alaric. "Thank you," he said simply, his voice carrying genuine gratitude. They sat, and in that small, unremarkable moment, something extraordinary began. The man introduced himself as Rowan Hale, and the girl as Mira. Their voices carried the warmth of familiarity, the kind that came from shared struggles and small victories. Alaric listened, at first out of politeness, then with something closer to interest. Rowan spoke about his day, about how he had promised Mira they would have a special dinner to celebrate the new year, even if it wasn't anything fancy. He admitted with a sheepish smile that he hadn't realized how crowded everywhere would be. Mira chimed in occasionally, her words bright and earnest, her excitement untouched by disappointment. Alaric found himself answering questions he didn't expect. What do you do? Do you like your job? Do you have family? The last question lingered longer than the others. He answered honestly, though not completely. "No," he said quietly. "Not really." Rowan didn't press. He simply nodded, as if understanding more than the words conveyed. The food arrived. Simple, unpretentious, exactly what it claimed to be. They ate together. At some point Mira laughed, a clear, unguarded sound that seemed to cut through something heavy inside Alaric. He couldn't remember the last time he had heard laughter like that up close, without filters, without expectations. And as the afternoon light began to fade into evening, something inside him began to change. It wasn't sudden. It wasn't dramatic. It was subtle, like the first crack in ice that had been frozen for too long. Rowan spoke about life in a way Alaric had forgotten existed. About finding joy in small things. About making promises you weren't sure you could keep, and then doing everything in your power to keep them anyway. He didn't speak like a man who had it easy. He spoke like a man who had chosen to keep going, despite everything. And for the first time in years, Alaric felt something unfamiliar. Connection, not the kind built on contracts or expectations, but the kind that existed simply because two people shared a moment. As the evening approached, the diner grew louder. More people filled the space, escaping the exclusivity of other places, finding comfort in its simplicity. And then Mira asked a question that changed everything. "Are you going to be alone tonight?" It was so direct, so innocent, that it caught Alaric completely off guard. He opened his mouth to answer, then paused. "Yes," he said finally. Mira frowned slightly, as if trying to understand something that didn't make sense to her. Rowan placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, but she didn't look away. "You can sit with us," she said. "We're not doing anything fancy, but it's still New Year's." The offer hung in the air, simple, honest, uncomplicated, and yet it carried more weight than any invitation Alaric had received in years. He looked at Rowan, expecting hesitation, uncertainty, But there was none. Only quiet acceptance. It would be nice, Rowan added. Something inside Alaric broke then, not in a painful way, but in a way that felt like release. He nodded, and just like that, the night changed. They stayed in the diner as the hours passed, talking, laughing, sharing stories that grew easier with time. Alaric found himself speaking more openly than he had in years, the words coming without calculation. He spoke about building his empire, about the sacrifices he had made, about the moments he had missed without realizing their value. Rowan listened. Without judgment, Mira listened with wide, curious eyes. As midnight approached, the diner buzzed with energy. People counted down together, strangers becoming temporary companions in a shared moment. And when the clock